How's it hanging, guys? Zach from the Rolling Times here, and today we're going to show you episode 2 of how to flip a car. Today's episode is going to cover inspecting and evaluating the car. So the first thing we want to do is inspect the car and see what all it needs. A couple obvious things that I saw my car needed. It had an overheating problem on the way home. I thought I had that fixed with the radiator fans. It had a bad relay, but unfortunately it's still not fixed, so it may need a water pump. But we want to go through the car and figure out what all it needs. I'm going to basically do a pre-inspection according to PA guidelines. It may be different in your state, or you may not even have a state inspection. But PA state inspection is pretty strict, so if your car passes PA state inspection, it should be good in other states. But we'll do a quick rundown of how that feels. And you can also evaluate the car a lot by your first drive in the car. What you want to do is, well, one, see if you have any issues like the car's overheating, but you can see how it shifts, see if the clutch slips, if it's a 5-speed. You can also feel if there's any play in the steering wheel, if the alignment feels off. Does the car pull to the left? Does it pull to the right? When you brake, does it pull to one side? Does the e-brake work? Do you get any shaking in the steering wheel or shaking in the brakes when you apply the brakes? Is that shaking coming from the front of the car or the rear of the car? A lot of times if it's an issue with your front wheels, like your front suspension or brakes or anything, you'll feel it in the steering wheel, and a lot of times if it's the rear, you're going to feel it in the seat. Alright guys, so we're going to start off by doing a little pre-inspection on the vehicle. The first thing we're going to check is all the lights on the outside of the vehicle. We basically do a visual around the vehicle. We're going to make sure the left turn signal works, the right turn signal works, the hazards work, your high beam, low beam. Then we're going to go to the back of the car, make sure the license plate lights illuminate. We're also going to make sure the running lights and the brake lights work. Alright, so as you guys can see, most of my lights work, but we do have a driver's side fog light and a passenger side marker light out. According to PA state inspection, any light on the vehicle has to work, so even if it's something like the fog light that isn't necessarily needed, if it's on the vehicle, it has to work. This is the same for any lights you add to the car. If you add any aftermarket lights, like aftermarket fog lights or ornamental lights like neons, if they're on the car, they have to work. Also, it's not something people check a lot, but fog lights have to turn on with the low beams, and auxiliary lights have to turn on with the high beams. Unless it comes from the factory different than that, but most people don't check that. But if you're going by the book, you need to follow that. The next thing we're going to want to look at on the outside of the car before we jack it up and take a look at the steering and suspension, we want to just go around and make sure all the glass is in good condition, there's no cracks, and we're also going to inspect the outside body panels for rust, any holes leading into the vehicle where exhaust fumes could get into the passenger compartment. If we take a look here, my windshield is cracked. It starts right about there. It's hard to see with the light, but it goes all the way to the center of the windshield. Starts getting smaller there. As far as windshield chips and cracks will usually fail. The most concerned area is right in front of the driver's field of view. I'd say about like that. If you have any chips or cracks in that area, it's an automatic fail. I believe cracks under 5 inches in length, as long as they're not in the driver's line of sight right in front of the driver, will still pass depending on what garage you take it to. That crack, however, because it's longer than 5 inches, is a definite fail, even though that it's not in front of the driver's view. Also, while we're looking at the outside of the car, one other thing that fails, this wiper blade's falling apart. What they check for inspection most of the time, if they spray the windshield with washer fluid, which yes, your wipers and your washer fluid has to work, but when they spray washer fluid on the windshield, your wipers should clean everything off within 3 swipes. From the outside of the vehicle, we don't have too much rust that concerns me. We have a little bit on the bottom of the driver's side door here, and we have a little bit on the quarter panel, but none of that's concerning. It's not structural. The car's not going to fall apart because of it, and it's not going to let any exhaust fumes into the passenger compartment. The other thing to check is underneath. We'll have to take a look at the floors and stuff. Under the hood, we're going to inspect the strut towers for any rust, which these look pretty good, so I'm not concerned about that. We're going to check the brake fluid, make sure that has fluid in it between the minimum and maximum. We also want to take a look at our brake lines quick, make sure we don't see any leaks or anything that looks like it's going to be damaged. We want to look for exhaust leaks. I know this thing has an exhaust leak underneath. It has a broken flex pipe, so I got to get that fixed. Do a quick examination of the belts and the hoses, just make sure nothing looks like it's leaking. Check your battery. This is one thing most people check. This fails. Your battery has to be secure. I got to loosen up that hold down and put the battery in properly, but since I've been swapping batteries between cars, I just kind of threw it in there quick, but that's an easy fix. Alright guys, so I'm jacking up the car, and we're going to want to take a look at if there's any play in the steering and suspension. And if you notice how we're going to do that, we're going to hold the wheel. If we're looking at a clock, it would be 9 and 3. So we're going to want to take the wheel, see if there's any side-to-side play in it, and then we're going to also grab the wheel at 1 and 6, try and give it a shake, see if there's any play. If there's no play, you should be good to go. If there is play, usually shaking the wheel from side to side is going to indicate that there's play in the steering components, such as the tie rods, inner outer tie rod end, ball joint, something like that. If we shake the wheel up and down and there's play, usually that means it's going to be a wheel bearing or control arm. This side looks good. The other thing we want to do, some cars you might have to take the wheel off to take a look at the brake pads. I tried to get the camera in there, but I couldn't really. This car, I can see through the wheels at the brake pads. They have plenty of life left. Basically, with the same thing with the tires. You want to take a look at the tires and make sure there's enough tread. A good trick for that is to take a penny out, stick a penny in between the tread, and if the tread is above Abraham Lincoln's head, then you have enough tread left. If it is not above, then you don't have enough tread, but 230 seconds is a requirement for tire tread. Same thing with the brakes, 230 seconds of brake pad left. If you look in there and look at the brake pad and the caliper, you see there's a big metal backing plate, and then inside of that there's pad material, and then the next thing is the rotor. So if you have, usually, like, I could get my finger in between the backing plate and the rotor, so those pads are almost new. There's probably like 10-30 seconds left, so they're fine. I also want to take a look at the rotor. Make sure that's not rusted, make sure it's not thin. I mean, we'll have some rust on the top of the rotor, and there is factory specs for every car as far as rotor thickness. Brakes and rotors are cheap, but in this case we don't need any. The tires look good too. The other thing you want to look at with the tires especially is if they are cracked, dry rotted, if there's any bubbles in the sidewalls or anything like that, that's an automatic fail. Looking at the rear wheel, the tires have plenty of tread left on them. The rotors are a little bit rusty, and depending on the mechanic's discretion, the garage may fail those rear rotors, but the pads have plenty of life left. You can see the brake pad a little bit easier on this one with the camera, but you can see on the outside there's a backing plate, on the inside there's that pad material there. And I'd say that's easily 4 or 5 30 seconds left on the brake pad, so the pad should pass. It's also good to know this stuff when you take your car to the garage, because tires and brake pads are an easy one for a garage to say, yeah, it doesn't pass, you need to replace them, when really you could probably get to at least next inspection on them. So that's just something that's good to know. Looking inside the car, one important thing for PA is if your car's in PA, to get PA inspection, you have to pass PA emissions first. If your car is 96 or newer, it's going to need a electronic test, and there's not really any way to beat that. So if your check engine light's on, it's automatically going to fail that electric test while they plug into the OBD2. So you're going to want to turn the key, make sure your check engine light's illuminated. It should be illuminated when the key is in the on position, and then when you start the car, it should turn off. Mine does not, so we're gonna have to scan it and see what codes are causing that check engine light to come on. It may very well be because of the exhaust leak and the broken downpipe. Let's hope so. So we're gonna have to get that check engine light off to get it to pass emissions so we can get it inspected. There's not a whole lot on the interior of the car. Your turn signals have to cancel when you turn. That's something that some garages check on the road test, and it's in the book. E-brake has to work. This one does not. So we'll have to take a look and see if the cables need adjusted or if they're broken or what's the case there. Try and get that fixed. I'm going to show you here with the wipers. So the driver's side works pretty good. I'd say that clears everything. The passenger side, there's a lot of crap still because that wiper blade's falling apart. So those technically would fail, or at least the passenger side, but usually just replace them as a set. We're also going to take a look. There's another reason that the check engine light could be on, is because whoever had this car before me lost the gas cap, and that will cause a check engine light. The emissions machine actually tests the gas cap to make sure it's holding pressure. So I will have to get a gas cap for this. That's another thing to add to the list. Rear wiper, not all cars have those, but I imagine if it has a rear wiper, it probably has to work too. I'd have to check the handbook and see for that one. The last thing you can do is kind of crawl under the car, check out the body and the floor pans, make sure there's no rust holes. Take a look at your exhaust, see if there's any leaks. As you can see, my new flex pipe's on there, but it's not welded up yet, so that's a giant leak there. So you're checking for holes, you're checking for rust, anything structural. It's really easy to take a look at all your control arm bushings and everything from underneath the car, especially if you have it up on a lift. Doing it on jack stands in your driveway isn't the easiest thing, but if you want to get in there, look at everything. You also want to check the brake lines while you're down there, fuel lines. Just make sure that everything looks good and not about to rust out and fall apart. When I had the Tiburon on the lift, I noticed the rear beam is all rusted out, and it's really probably unsafe, and that probably will fail inspection, so I might have to get a new rear beam for it. So that's another thing to add to the list. But other than that, the floor pans and everything look pretty good underneath. Alright guys, so that kind of wraps up a quick PA safety inspection. That does not cover everything. There's a lot more that I didn't cover, but that's all the major stuff. And that's what most garages check for. Some are more picky than others. Some go through and do every single thing by the book. Some guys just check all the major stuff. There's also a road test where they drive the car and check alignment and stuff like that. Make sure nothing feels unsafe, no clunks, no pulling off the road, that sort of thing. And also, a lot of stuff's up to the mechanic's discretion. So if he feels like something's unsafe, he can fail the car, even if the book doesn't necessarily say, well, it fails if it does this, or it fails if it does that. So there's a lot of good garages out there. There's some shady garages out there. But there's really a lot of reasons why your car can pass and fail. But if you do all the steps I just did, that'll cover most of it, and it'll kind of get you an idea if you're going to need a lot or a little bit for inspection, or maybe you won't need anything at all. So PA inspection, or just getting your car inspected, is going to make it a lot easier to sell. A mechanically sound car that's ready to go and doesn't need to be inspected for another year is a huge selling point. So we kind of looked at all the mechanical issues. The other thing, looking at the interior, this car doesn't have a head unit, so it'd be nice to put a radio in it. That would make it more appealing to people. But the windows work, the sunroof works, the interior is in decent shape. There's some tears under the driver's seat, but these are all things we want to look at. We all know we know all the issues the car has, all the things that we could make better on the car. Now we just got to see. So I have 325 into it right now as we're sitting here, and we want to take a look at what I think I can sell the car for, what I could sell it for in the state it is in now, and also what I could sell it for with everything fixed, or some of the stuff fixed. And then we want to evaluate whether it makes more sense to sell it as is and save a little bit of time, maybe not make quite as much profit, or if we want to fix a few things and if it'll be worth enough to sell it with putting more money into it. So if I put 400 or 500 of parts into this, can I get $2,000 out of it? If not, it might not be worth putting that $400 or $500. I might be better off selling it for $800 to $1,000, making a couple hundred off of it the way it is. Because actually I have more like $450 into it with the notary and title transfer fees now. So a good way to evaluate what the car is worth. There's a couple of ways. You can go online, look up the car on Kelley Blue Book. That'll give you a general idea. I find a lot of times some cars are really low, some cars are really high. Some cars are dead on, but you can plug in what car it is, what features it has, mileage, and it'll tell you about what the others are selling for in the area. I always look at the private value, selling it privately, not the trade-in or the dealer value, because that kind of gives you an idea. I find a lot of times cars that are worth like $900 on Kelley Blue Book, you find on a used car lot for like $3,000. So that's not always the most accurate, but it will give you an idea. I think this car in good condition was like $900 to $1,500 or something like that. Another good way to figure out what the car is worth is go on Facebook Marketplace, go on other places, and try and find similar cars and see what they're selling for in this kind of shape, or if they're needing parts or whatever. I kind of, just from what I looked around, I'd say in the state the car's in now, it's probably worth $600 to $1,000 to the right person. I think if I clean it up, make it look nice, and fix the visual stuff and visually make it look better, it'll probably be worth that $1,000. If I get everything mechanically sound and get it inspected, I'd say it's probably worth closer to 15. It does have high mileage, but it's not over 200K yet. So we'll see and kind of evaluate over the next couple episodes what all I want to fix and replace. I have been driving the car back and forth a little bit, so I may end up replacing some stuff. Like, it's always good to do a fresh oil change, all that stuff, so the buyer knows all of it's done. Keep the receipts, so that way they know you did it for sure. Alright guys, well that wraps up episode 2. Inspect and evaluate the car and see what it's worth and what it needs, and decide what money you want to put into it and what you want to fix. If you guys have any questions about inspection or anything like that, I will try and help you out best I can in the comments below. This is Zach from The Rolling Times, over and out.